Welcome to the Object-Oriented UX podcast, a podcast about tackling complexity head-on, gracefully organizing massive amounts of information, and designing scalable, future-proof, and of course, naturally intuitive object-oriented user experiences. An OUXer is a powerful blend of information architect, business analyst, facilitator, and UX strategist. If this sounds like you or what you aspire to, you are so in the right place. I'm Sophia Prater, UX designer, chief evangelist of Object-Oriented UX, and your host. Let's jump into it.
Hello, OUXers. I am feeling a little sick today, so I might sound a bit sniffly or a little raspy, but I have been working on this new training for OUX Foundations. We have 226 students in the cohort, and it is such a party. And I've just been trying to over-deliver to them as much as possible. So I promise this new training, something I've been thinking about for a while based on some objections to OUX and specifically the ORCA process. And that objection is that process kills creativity. So I'm going to be getting into this today. I'm sorry if I'm like a little sniffly or if I sneeze, I'll try to edit out all the gross stuff. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about process and creativity, and specifically how you can use ORCA, objects, relationships, CTAs, and attributes to innovate. And I have to say that, I suppose it depends on which process you're using. There might be some processes that do kill creativity, but I do believe that creativity thrives in the right processes, and that ORCA is an amazing process for creativity and innovation. So I'm going to be building on this whole idea for OUX Foundations. So if you're interested in getting the full training on this, go ahead and sign up for the waitlist at OUX.com/foundations. We will be offering up the Foundations Content Vault very soon, which gets you into the Foundations family so that you can get VIP access to all the live workshop series next time we offer it, which will be in spring of 2026. And you'll also be preparing yourself for certification this fall if you decide to join that live program. It'll be very, very good for you to get all settled in with the Foundations content. So go to OUX.com/foundations to get on the wait list, and we will be delivering the goodies very soon. Okay. So real talk. All right. So if your boss comes up to you and says, I want some fresh new ideas. Let's innovate. Let's get creative. What does your process look like? Do you get out a blank sheet of paper? Do you get out a stack of blank sheets of paper and say, okay, I'm going to fill out these 20 sheets of paper in the next hour? And that's amazing. I absolutely love that. Let's create a ton of bad ideas and then get together and mash up our bad ideas and review them and build on them. So design sprints like Crazy Eights does this, add a time constraint, going for quantity. This is just a really great way to come up with new ideas. You might lean on Lean UX, no pun intended, or Stanford's design thinking frameworks, but all of these kind of have a couple key ingredients in common that bring them together into this 5 to 7-ish step process, depending on how you break things down. But the first thing is getting clear on research, the domain, and the problem, like really grounding your creative process in reality, right? And then diverging, coming up with a ton of ideas, usually with some sort of time constraint or prompt, like a how might we prompt. And usually this is done solo with that quantity goal. Then next, we converge collaboratively, doing things like dot voting and discussing and clustering ideas and poking holes and finding basically what is worth moving forward with. Then we go into remixing, refining, mashing up, and just sharpening the best ideas that we end up prototyping and testing, building something really light and getting feedback on that. And finally, taking that feedback and iterating or pivoting basically on how the test went. So I am 100% behind this. I love it all. All right. So understand the problem, create a ton of stuff, most of which will become fertilizer for the few good ideas that get tested and iterated on. But y'all, let's dig into number 2, that diverging, that coming up with a ton of ideas. Like, this is where creativity comes in. So let me take a step back a second and let's talk about the difference between innovation and creativity. So my definition, this is my definition of innovation is research plus creativity plus execution. So taking that creative thinking and grounding it in research and reality, and then actually executing, actually building a prototype, building that lightweight thing, getting it in people's hands. All right, so creativity by itself is simply the ability to generate new and original ideas. Those new and original ideas do not necessarily have to be grounded in reality, and you don't actually have to execute anything that's going to, solve anybody's problems. So creativity is a key ingredient in the innovation process, but you don't need to be innovating to be a creative person, actually. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. So to recap, I am all good on the basic innovation process of rooting in reality, diverging, converging, testing, and iterating. But creativity really happens in that diverging space and that mysterious blank page, right? Coming up with those new ideas. And to a certain extent, creativity also happens in the converging place too, where you're yes-anding other people's ideas, you're remixing ideas, you're taking this idea that you came up with and this idea that somebody else came up with and sort of bringing them together into something even better. So totally, there's creativity there, but let's really focus on that blank page coming up with new ideas. So in these structured processes, often, like we already said, there's some sort of time constraints and some sort of quantity goal as we're coming up with those new ideas. And a good brainstorming facilitator will often give additional constraints to prompt creative thinking, like how would a 5-year-old solve this? Or what would this look like if it were a game? Or if we were Disney, how would we solve this problem? Or if we were Netflix, how would we solve this problem? Or if our users were wizards, what would we create for them, right? That kind of thing. And this is all good too. Being able to create these sort of make-believe additional constraints that sort of jog the creative thinking. But there is one big problem that happens really specifically when UX designers are given a blank sheet of paper and told to just get creative, even within a structured process, even when it's like clearly rooted in a clear problem and there's some fun artificial constraints. And I'm going to get to that problem in a moment. But first, let's address a bit of the elephant in the room. And that is this idea that seems to float around the UX sphere. And I'm not sure if this is in other industries. Is it just in our industry? But that is this idea that too much process kills creativity. So I especially get to hear this objection because the process that I evangelize in all of its archetypical glory is 16 steps. It used to be only a nice trim 15 steps, and now it is 16 steps. And some people hear that and they just shut down, assuming that it means that it's a very rigid 16 steps, assuming that it can't possibly apply to any and all problems, and most insidiously, assuming that within such a rigorous process, there is no room for creativity. And in fact, the opposite is true. So creativity with no constraints is like a river with no banks to channel its flow. And when you have a river with no banks, you get a shapeless flood or a swamp. All right, you get stagnation actually. So to get into flow, to channel our creativity, to get momentum, all right, we need some guardrails. We need nice, clear banks to sort of channel all of those wild ideas. And artists, musicians, some of the greatest innovators in history are notorious for their creative processes and rituals. And we just went over these popular processes for innovation of our day, this kind of summary of design sprints and design thinking and lean UX. And it's common knowledge that constraints breed creativity. I mean, when researching this and looking at other ways creativity is incentivized, basically for lack of a better word that came to mind, it is creating additional artificial make-believe constraints like, how would we design this for aliens or something like that? All right. So can we just dispel this idea that constraints are going to hamper your creativity? It is absolutely not true. And actually, the opposite is true. But what kind of constraints do we want to create? So yes, we can create those artificial make-believe constraints, or we can create time constraints, or or we can create flow with frameworks and processes that methodically step us through the constraining but actual parts of our system so that we can find innovative new parts for that system. And I know that's a mouthful. It's really hard to explain what I'm talking about, so I'm going to give you examples. But before I get into some examples, let's just go back to that problem. I know that I'm jumping around, but there's method to my madness. Let's go back to that problem of what happens when UXers are given the blank page and told to innovate, even in the context of fun artificial constraints and structured brainstorming. And this is what happens, y'all. As UXers, what we end up sketching on our blank sheets of paper is usually in the form of some sort of screen sketches. So some like scrappy wireframes or bits of UI connected by arrows. And this is what I did for the first 5 years of my career. And sometimes it's fine, but I honestly believe that if you are a UX designer, there is a better way. The problem with jumping into sketching screens is we're skipping into the packaging and implementation of the idea before we figure out the actual meat of the idea. And the crux of this is, as UX designers, our medium is not UI. We've been convinced to believe that our medium is UI, but that is the medium of UI designers. So what is our medium as UX designers? Because that's what we want to use to sketch our new ideas. We want to use the medium of a UX designer. And this brings me, my friends, to ORCA, the stuff of systems. And as UX designers in this day and age, we must think of ourselves as systems designers. And all systems are made of objects, relationships, CTAs, and attributes, what we can call a systems ORCA. And this is our material. This is our Legos, our building blocks for creativity and thus innovation. Okay, and it might seem simple. Oh, objects, relationships, CTAs, and attributes. Oh my gosh, there is so much you can build with that because really it is the core of any system. So again, our medium, it's not UI, it's not slide outs, it's not droplets, animations, interactions, unless you're a UI designer. And perhaps you are both. Perhaps you are one of those real deal UX/UI designers. But when you put your UX hat on, you are designing the bones of a system, and that is made up of O's and R's and C's and A's. And the very cool thing is, these are awesome, really, really fun Lego blocks, and they're so important. All right. So a systems ORCA actually has the most exciting opportunities for creating a competitive edge, which is what we're trying to do, right? That is the point of innovating, is to solve a problem in a new and better way than us last year or what our competitors are planning for next year. So if we are competing on new UI animations or a slicker, more delightful brand, or even better uptime or more stability or a faster response time, like that is amazing. We should totally be doing that. Those are all very, very important. All right. But they are also easy to replicate. They're easy to copy and they're easy to catch up with. So what do we want to do? You might say, well, add new features. What the fuck is a feature? What is a feature? What does a feature even mean? I will tell you what a feature means, actually. Let's get specific on what a feature actually is. So usually a feature is a new object being introduced. Okay, so for example, I just opened up Apple Maps accidentally. Who uses Apple Maps, right? It's Google Maps all day. I accidentally opened up Apple Maps on my computer and I got this splash screen saying, Apple Maps is introducing hikes and custom routes. Hikes and custom routes, new objects, okay? Or you might have a feature that is introducing a new connection or a relationship. So for example, Alex V, who is part of Foundations, gave us a really amazing video. She was showing us some shapeshifters and broken objects. And then another thing that I realized in the app that she was showing us, or in the website that she was showing us for a healthcare plan picker, was you could connect the plan that you were shopping for and you could input your doctors and your drugs to see what is covered in that plan. So you could connect plan to my doctors and my prescription/drugs to get better insight into what plan is going to work the best for you. That is amazing. The last time I chose a healthcare plan, that did not exist. I've never seen that before. That is innovation, and innovation around the R of the ORCA process. All right, it's a new connection being built. You could call that a feature. Or a new CTA on an object. This is usually what we focus on when we think about features, like new things that you can do to objects. So being able to suddenly, you can remix a reel, or you can edit a tweet, or you can merge contacts, that kind of thing. Or a new attribute. All right, we'll also say like that's a feature, a new attribute. Now Trails on All Trails has an elevation map, or now team members in our project management app can turn on and off availability. So now availability is a new attribute on team members. Okay, you can call that a new feature, but let's break down this really amorphous word feature and say, what are we actually doing? Are we adding a new object? Are we adding a new relationship? Is this a new CTA on an object or a new attribute on an object? Okay, so this gives us this beautiful framework to get a little bit more granular on how we want to innovate. All right. And once we can create a more innovative and stronger and more aligned ORCA, we are competing on a whole new level. All right. And we are innovating on a whole new level. So here are some questions I want you to ask around the O's, the R's, the C's, and the A's. And feel free to add this to your existing innovation process. Feel free to pretend that you are a 5-year-old or you work at Disney, or add some time constraints and come up with 8 ideas, like 3 minutes each or something like that. But these questions will get you playing around with those Lego bricks of the system. And I'm also going to give you some examples, and I'm just going to imagine that I'm an Airbnb designer and I just came up with these things within, I don't know, like 20 minutes or something while I was planning this podcast. So you can kind of see how I can put my innovation hat on, imagining I work at Airbnb, and actually come up with some cool ideas. So for the O of ORCA, objects, you can ask yourself, what are some objects or concepts in the user's mental model that are not represented in our system or in our competitor system? So you can do this. You can look for nouns used in the research, nouns that are just showing up over and over and over again, things that your customers are saying when they're talking about travel, for instance, with Airbnb. And you can start saying, ooh, like they always are mentioning their travel buddies, or they're always mentioning their bucket list places. Those might be 2 interesting objects that we could explore. Okay, and this is kind of turning Airbnb into a more social application, but if we have for the travel buddy object, like what if like I could see other users? Like I can invite people to a wish list right now, but what might the concept of a travel buddy be within Airbnb? All right, that could be something interesting that we can go down an innovation rabbit hole thinking about. Or bucket list place. Maybe that comes up over and over and over again when people are talking about travel, is talking about places on their bucket list. And could this create really interesting, maybe suggested listings or suggested trips if a user could put in all their bucket list places? And wouldn't that be interesting for Airbnb to know? Interesting data as well. So those are just 2 objects that I very easily came up with, just noun foraging my own mind when I think about travel. Okay, so another question you can ask when it comes to the R of ORCA is, what are some things that are connected in the user's mental model that are not currently connected in your system? So going back to our Airbnb example, this is a really obvious one, and I am so curious on why they haven't created this yet. But experiences and listings are currently not connected. So they have experiences like, this person teaching you to juggle in Times Square or something like that. And then they have a listing, penthouse in Times Square, and those are not connected. All right. So if I look at a listing, I don't see, here are some recommended experiences that are even like, it could look at availability too, because usually when I'm looking at a listing, it's for a certain date range. It could say, oh, within, a mile, within walking distance of this listing, here's some experiences that you might want to be able to check out, and add them to cart all at once, right? Like, yes, I'm going to get this listing and then add these 2 experiences too. And then on the flip side, looking at an experience, I might find an experience I really, really want to do, like this amazing photo shoot in this cool neighborhood in LA. And then maybe I would want to see available listings. So where do I want to stay while I go do that photo shoot? So I am just shocked that these are not connected. This feels like also just money being left on the table. And as a user, I'm totally connecting those in my mind. But instead, what I have to do is I have to really kind of finagle around experience and listings to say, okay, here's the listing that I'm staying at. Where is it? It's around this area. And then I need to go to experiences and really kind of have them open in 2 tabs to see how close they are to each other. And if I'm going to be traveling without a car, I don't necessarily want to have a bunch of experiences that are, a 30-minute Uber ride away. Anyway, I don't like, if you work at Airbnb or if you have an idea, it's like why from a business perspective, they wouldn't want to connect those things. I don't understand. The other thing that they surprisingly don't do is they don't connect listing to listing. This is just a recursive relationship, not even a cross-linking relationship. They do connect experiences to experiences. So if I'm looking at an experience, it will show me other experiences that I might like based on this experience, other similar experiences. But if I'm looking at a listing, it doesn't show me other listings. It doesn't even show me other listings by this host, which seems like a no-brainer. Like I'm thinking from a business perspective, maybe they don't want, maybe the Airbnb hosts kind of push back on this. Like, no, we don't want our listing page to sell other people's listings. But at the very least, other listings by this host, right, that maybe are available at the same time. And then at the same time, if it's not, if it's not a matter of hosts pushing back on this, how cool would that be from a user perspective that I'm looking at this listing and it could show me maybe other listings in the area, or like other listings that maybe are in the same time and the same price range, but are a completely different area. Like maybe I could tab over and say, surprise me or something like that. Maybe I don't want to go to Milwaukee. Maybe I'll go somewhere else because it is basically the same price and a similar listing somewhere else. It's just surprising. But that would be a thing that in some sort of innovation context that I might bring to the table. Okay. Oh, another one for relationships that I thought of was if we did introduce the concept of a travel buddy. So I could put, the couple people that I like to travel with. This is just a handful of people. Most of us probably have only a few people that we actually would want to travel with. And let's say I have a friend. So let's think, I'll shout out to Allie O'Fisher, who is outside of Chicago, and I'm down in Georgia, and we love traveling together. How cool would it be if we could be travel buddies? So we're connected within Airbnb, and it could suggest places that are halfway in between. This is an 1.5-hour flight for both of you. And this beautiful listing, y'all have stayed similar places together. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. It has an outdoor balcony. Y'all would love this place. You should definitely go. Airbnb, if you're listening, that would be really, really cool. I don't even know what the halfway point is for us. And for Airbnb to kind of do the math. Okay, I'm going down a complete rabbit hole because I'm innovating. I'm innovating just by thinking about the relationships. Okay, what might some CTAs on these objects be that are maybe missing? What are some things users might want to do to the objects or that they do in the real world, but that are not carried over into the digital space? The first thing I thought of when it comes to Airbnb was comparing listings. Oh my gosh, I'm literally planning a bachelorette party right now and came so close to actually transferring the data from Airbnb into a Notion table so that I could compare the listings. Okay, what is the cost breakdown? How many bedrooms does this have? Like we're trying to house 16 people or something ridiculous like that. How cool would it be to have a compare, quote unquote, feature, which is really a CTA on the listing object. Click and compare on up to, 3 or 4 different listings and be able to see them in a side-by-side comparison, and even being able to kind of drag and drop metadata around to say, okay, we really want to see which ones are dog friendly or which ones have a view or something like that. So compare listings. So you can think about the CTAs on the objects. Another fun thing to innovate on when it comes to the C of ORCA is roles. So would you want to introduce a new role? This gets into kind of big picture, horizontal or vertical integration, but something like what would Airbnb look like for travel agents? What would if a travel agent wanted to use Airbnb and maybe we had a whole program where we had Airbnb travel agents where you could get help figuring out what listing you wanted to go with, or planning a whole trip and planning your excursions and everything, but they were specific to Airbnb. That might be a really interesting avenue to go down, or even the Airbnb AI as a role. So this is where I've been really playing with innovating around artificial intelligence, is thinking about artificial intelligence as a role and what that AI would do to the different objects for the benefit of the user within a system. So play around with AI as a role, or other roles that might be really interesting to bring into your system and to serve. Finally, attributes, the A of ORCA. So how do users want to group objects? How can we help them narrow a list of objects down? So again, what are they doing in the real world to kind of group these things? What attributes are missing? And then the other question we can also ask is, can we visualize those attributes in a new and more interesting way? So for example, for Travel Buddy, or for the person object within Airbnb, what if I could integrate with my calendar, or I could set availability? So I could say, here's the days that I can take PTO, here's my general like travel availability, so that it could create overlap with your travel buddies and then suggest listings. And what if it was also baking in bucket list places? So, you and this other travel buddy have the same bucket list place. You have the same availability here. And here's some amazing listings that would be perfect for you. So now I just mixed a lot of stuff. I just mixed attributes, I just mixed new objects, and I mixed relationships together. And often that happens with innovation. Another attribute that I would love to see in an Airbnb is an outdoor space score. So one thing that they're not really great about is showing whether there's a balcony or a terrace, or, even just big windows that open, or some sort of yard. Usually I do want access to outdoor space, and it's kind of hard to find that. So whether it's the actual tags for that they could add, or some sort of score, like how much access to nature do you have? A nature score or something like that might be an interesting thing to play around with. And when it comes to visualizing, this could be a visualization, or even actually a bit of UI here on how a user might filter and sort. So for example, I think Airbnb was the first to do this, and I've seen this in other places too, of the little kind of bar graph visualization for filtering down listings based on the price. If you haven't seen that yet, go play around with that in Airbnb. But I think that they were the first ones to do that. That's the first place I can remember seeing it, and then I've seen it in other places. But that is a little micro innovation there. And it's really, really helpful because you can see the concentration of price ranges based on your search results. So it's a really interesting visualization. So it is bridging over into UI and the visualization of an attribute. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some really nice fodder to think about innovation differently and think about how you can innovate through the ORCA process. So in my training in OUX Foundations, I'll be getting even deeper into more questions you can ask, more examples, more lenses that you can look through to innovate with ORCA. So check out OUX.com/foundations to get on the wait list, or maybe when you go there, depending on what time of the year it is, we will be enrolling for a live cohort of the Foundations program. So happy OUXing and happy innovating with ORCA. Cheers, y'all.
Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit objectorientux.com/podcast for show notes. Our soundtrack is Fighter by Ruby Vell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Happy OUXing!